steady hum of the 18-wheeler, the rumble beneath my seat was once my heartbeat. For 20 years, almost to the day, I lived by that rhythm. Miles stacked on miles, asphalt a ribbon stretched out to forever. I grew used to the monotony, the endless sameness of the road, until it became a peace. It was a good life. Lonesome, but I liked my own company. I never much cared for crowds or folks telling me what to do. Out on the interstate, just me and old Betsy, a full tank of diesel, and a thermos of stale coffee, I was my own man. No boss breathing down my neck, no wife waiting up, no kids to worry about. Just the road, stretching from the sunrise in Maine to the endless dusty sunsets out in Arizona. I saw a lot of America from the cab of that freightliner. The big cities glowed like fallen stars, the little towns huddled in valleys like sleepy farm animals. I saw the faces of other truckers in diner mirrors, tired and etched with a shared unspoken gallows humor, born of long nights and too much caffeine. We were a tribe, we road warriors, self-reliant every one of us. We knew how to fix a flat in a blizzard, knew how to talk our way out of a tight spot with a state trooper, knew how to stretch $1 and a pack of cigarettes for 1,000 miles. I took pride in that, pride in my independence. I never thought I would lose it. I never thought I would find myself so beholden to anyone, let alone them. The day it all went south was a Tuesday. The days blurred quickly after that, like rain on a windshield. I ran a back road route through the heart of the Appalachians, a shortcut a buddy told me about, meant to shave a few hours off the run from Knoxville up to Raleigh. The road narrowed until tree branches kissed the side mirrors, pavement cracked and swallowed by weeds, and the air hung thick and green. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping low behind the ridges, throwing long, spooky shadows across the asphalt. Then came the sound. A shriek of metal on metal rattled my teeth and vibrated through the floorboards. Every hair on my arm stood straight. The noise declared, plain as day, something expensive had broken. A cloud of acrid, burnt oil smoke billowed out from under the hood, thick and greasy, stinging my eyes. The engine sputtered, groaned like a dying beast, and then just stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the wind sighed through the pines and the distant caw of a crow. I pulled old Betsy over to the shoulder. The rig leaned precariously in the soft dirt, and I cut the engine. I sat there for a moment, just breathing, trying to calm the frantic thump of my heart. I climbed out. The air was humid and heavy, smelling of damp earth and pine needles and that sharp, sickly sweet stench of burning oil. I opened the hood. What I saw revealed a catastrophic breakdown. A broken fan belt, a busted radiator hose, oil everywhere. A mess. I had seen worse, of course, but always near a gas station or with a passing car every 10 minutes. Here there was nothing. Just trees. Miles and miles of dark, unbroken forest rose up the hills, ancient and silent, watching me. I tried my cell phone. No signal. Not even a bar. I walked a little ways up the road, then down, waving the phone around like an idiot. Nothing. Just dead air. Panic crept in then, cold and sharp, right under my ribs. I was alone. Truly alone. And the sun went down fast. Just as the last slivers of orange light faded from the sky, a figure emerged from the deep shadows of the tree line. An old man, bent at the waist, moved slow but steady. He carried a stout walking stick and wore overalls faded almost white, a checked shirt, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. He was a figure straight out of a picture from 100 years ago. "Trouble, son?" His voice, raspy like dry leaves skittering across pavement, was surprisingly kind. Before I could fully answer, two more figures materialized from the same spot. They were younger men in their 30s, equally anachronistic in their denim and homespun shirts. They carried axes over their shoulders, the polished steel glinting faintly in the fading light. Their eyes missed nothing. They looked strong and capable. "Looks like a right mess, that does," one of the younger ones said, nodding at my rig. "You're a long way from anywhere, son," the old man added, stepping closer. "No help came on this road tonight. Not a soul for 20 miles in either direction." He squinted at me, a network of wrinkles around his eyes. "Tell you what, we have a place, just a ways yonder. It isn't much, but it's warm. We can get you food, a bed, and we have folks who know a thing or two about engines. We will get you fixed up in a day or two." I was wary, naturally. A solitary trucker 20 years on the road learns to be wary. But the thought of spending the night out there, alone, with a broken-down rig and that dark, watching forest, pushed my caution to the side. They were harmless enough, almost gentle in their old-fashioned ways. Their clothes, their mannerisms, they transported me back in time. So I nodded. "Appreciate it. Mike's the name." The old man smiled, a flash of uneven teeth. "Pleased to meet you, Mike. I'm Silas. These here are my boys, Caleb and Jude." They led me down a barely visible path, swallowed by kudzu and shadow, away from the cracked asphalt, deeper into the forest. The path wound for a considerable distance, past ancient oaks and towering pines, until it opened up into a small, unexpected clearing, the village. It was not on any map I had ever seen, and I had seen plenty. There were no signs, no road markers, just the abrupt appearance of wooden houses, simple and sturdy, built from rough-hewn logs and clapboard. They were old, undeniably, but meticulously maintained. Not a loose shingle or a rotting porch board in sight. It was a living diorama of a pioneer settlement. There was no electricity, no humming power lines, no streetlights, no glow of televisions. Only the soft, flickering light of oil lamps and the warm orange pulse of a central bonfire, sending sparks spiraling up into the inky sky. The air smelled of wood smoke, wet earth, and something else. Something subtly sweet and earthy, the scent of wild herbs. Children played in the dirt lanes between the houses, their laughter clear and bright, but their games were ancient. Hopscotch drawn with charcoal. Tag played among the looming shadows, chasing each other with wooden sticks. No plastic toys, no handheld devices. The women sat on porches, their hands busy with knitting or mending, their faces serene under the soft lamplight. It was all too peaceful, unnervingly so. An unnatural calm settled over everything, a thick, heavy blanket. Silas ushered me into one of the larger cabins. The interior was warm, smelling of cedar and stew. A heavy iron pot bubbled over a stone hearth. A young woman with long, dark hair and startlingly bright eyes greeted me with a shy smile, offering me a bowl of thick, savory stew and a slab of fresh-baked cornbread. The food was good, surprisingly so, rich with game and root vegetables. Their hospitality was overtly excessive. They piled my plate high, insisted I take the cleanest, softest bed in a small, separate room off the main living area, and reiterated again and again that my truck would be handled. Our mechanic, a good man. He'll take a look first thing in the morning, Silas promised. his eyes twinkling in the firelight. "A couple of days, maybe 3, and you'll be back on the road good as new. A couple of days? For a broken fan belt, a busted hose, and an oil leak? In this wilderness?" It sounded too easy, too quick. My trucker's instinct, honed by years of roadside repairs and shady mechanics, told me that was a load of bunk. But I was tired, fed, and had a soft bed waiting. I pushed the nagging doubt aside. For now. The next morning I woke to the scent of coffee and sizzling bacon. The sun was already high, slanting through the single small window of my room. The window, I noticed, did not face the village or the path I had taken. It faced directly into the dense, unbroken forest, a wall of green leaves and dark trunks. No view of the outside world, no way to gauge the direction I had come from. A small thing, I told myself. A minor detail. After a hearty breakfast, I made my excuses. "Need to check on my rig," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just want to see what your mechanic says." Silas put a hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "No need to rush, Mike. The boys are already on it. No point in you trundling all that way out there and back. You rest up. You earned it." Caleb, who had appeared beside us, chimed in, "Aye, that road out of here, it's easy to get lost if you ain't used to it. Best to wait for us to go with you." Their kindness felt less like kindness and more like a demand, strong and undeniable. I tried again later in the day. Just stretch my legs a bit. Take a walk through the woods. "Oh, it's not safe," Jude said, appearing from nowhere. He had waited in the shadows. His smile was too wide, too fixed. "Plenty of critters in these woods. Best stay close to the clearing." That evening, I noticed the door to my room stood a hair ajar, not quite closed when I returned from dinner. I always left it shut. When I walked around the house at night when everyone else was asleep, I caught the faintest whisper of movement, a soft rustle just out of sight. A floorboard creaked upstairs, a shadow shifted at the edge of my peripheral vision. I was watched, constantly. The unease curdled into outright suspicion. The couple of days' promise felt like a lead weight in my gut. I had to see my truck. I had to know what was really going on. Late that night, under a sky choked with stars, I slipped out of my room. Every creak of the floorboards under my weight felt like a gunshot. I moved through the silent village, a silent figure in the lamplit gloom, towards the faint track that led back to the main road. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of something earthy and feral from the surrounding woods. I found my truck where I had left it, a hulking, broken silhouette against the moonlight. But it was not just broken. It was dismantled. The hood was gone entirely. The engine block lay on a tarp beside the frame, hoses and wires dangling like severed veins. Tires were off, stacked neatly to the side. The cab itself was a hollowed-out shell, the seats removed, the dashboard stripped bare. Someone had taken a fine watch and scattered its gears across the table, not to fix it, but to render it utterly, irretrievably useless. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. My breath hitched in my throat, tasting like rust and fear. This was not a repair job. This was an autopsy. They had not wanted to fix my truck. They wanted to make sure I could not leave. The realization hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. This was not some friendly, isolated community. This was not a shortcut gone wrong. I was not just stuck, I was trapped. The smiles of Silas and his boys, the excessive hospitality, the warnings about the forest, they were not acts of kindness. They were the walls of a cage I had not even realized I was in until it was too late. The trap had no physical bars, no locked doors, but it was just as real, just as inescapable. And I, Mike, the self-reliant man of the road, was caught. The initial panic, cold and sharp, eventually dulled to a persistent ache, like an old injury that never quite healed. Days folded into weeks, weeks into months. The promises about my truck, delivered with the same placid smiles and kind eyes, became as hazy and formless as the mountain mist that often shrouded the ridges in the early mornings. "Almost there, Mike," Silas would say, his voice a comforting rasp. Just a few more parts were fashioning up. Takes time, you know, doing things right. It was always a few more parts, always almost there. The words became meaningless, a lullaby of deceit. I could not just sit idle. To avoid feeling like a burden, and to keep the gnawing dread at bay, I started working alongside the locals, hauling logs from the forest, repairing fences, helping with the small hidden patches of corn and beans they tended. My hands, once accustomed to the smooth, cool steel of the steering wheel and the familiar weight of a wrench, grew calloused and rough from swinging an axe and hauling dirt. I became proficient, in a grim way, a part of their quiet, arduous rhythm. It did not take long to notice the peculiarities of their daily lives. They did not live by the clock. Instead, the moon dictated their schedule more than the sun. Many activities, gathering certain herbs, preparing hides, even some of the more intense logging operations, occurred after dusk, under the pale glow of the night sky. There was a sense of an internal, ancient calendar, measured by lunar phases and the turning of the seasons, rather than the Gregorian dates I had always lived by. It was a life deeply intertwined with the natural world, a life that was less respect and more subservience. My efforts to reach the outside world became more desperate, then dwindled to futility. I scrounged through old sheds, looking for anything that might pick up a signal. A battered old shortwave radio, its casing cracked and tubes long dead. A rotary phone, green with age, its cord severed at the wall. When I asked about a working radio or a way to make a call, the villagers simply shrugged, their eyes empty and unhelpful. "We never had such things here, Mike," they said, the concept foreign to them. "It's always been this way." I realized I had not just stumbled into an isolated community. I had fallen into a pocket of time, a capsule where the modern world simply did not exist. It was not allowed to exist. The information isolation was complete, suffocating. Their customs were as strange and unsettling as their lunar clock. There was a rigid, unspoken hierarchy, a deep, animalistic deference to Silas, the old man who had saved me. His word was law, his glance enough to silence any murmur of dissent. Rituals, simple but profound, marked the passage of the full moon and the solstices. They involved quiet gatherings around the bonfire, chanted words in a language I did not understand, and the distribution of a thick, earthy brew that tasted of herbs and something else I could not quite place, but instinctively recoiled from. And their relationship with the forest was a profound, mystical reverence. The woods were not just a source of timber and game. They were a living entity, a protector, a provider. Sometimes it was a hungry maw. I stood always on the outside, a spectator to a play where I did not know the script or the deeper rules. Then came the first full moon. I had heard tales of coyotes in the mountains, sure. Their yips and howls were chilling, lonely sounds on a cold night. But what I heard that night was different. It started around midnight, a low, guttural growl that vibrated up from the very bedrock of the mountains. Then came the howls. Long, drawn-out, utterly inhuman cries that echoed through the valleys, ripping at the fabric of the night. It was not the yipping of a coyote pack. This was primal. This was wild. This was pain and rage and something ancient and untamed. It raised the hair on my neck and sent a shiver straight down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool night air. I bolted upright in my bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked out my forest-facing window but saw nothing but inky blackness, the trees a solid, impenetrable wall. The sounds went on for hours, a cacophony of terror that made my stomach clench and the bile rise in my throat. When I asked about it the next morning, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep, the villagers smiled too brightly. "Just the coyotes, Mike," Caleb said, wiping grease from his chin with the back of his hand. "Sounds worse than it is. They're just singing to the moon." But my gut screamed otherwise. It was no coyote. That sound was too big, too powerful, too full of raw, bloodthirsty intent. It was something else. And from that night on, the full moon brought with it nightmares, shadowy shapes in the woods, the glint of yellow eyes, and those awful, soul-curdling screams. I woke in a cold sweat, gasping for breath, the sound still ringing in my ears. The growing unease, the baffling customs, the isolation, and now the howls. It all pushed me towards a desperate decision. I had to leave, on foot, as necessary. I'd spent 2 decades navigating unknown roads, reading maps, orienting myself by the sun and stars. I could do this. I waited for a day when Silas and his boys were occupied with a logging detail deep in the woods, a fact I believed to be true. I packed a small bag with what little food I could scrounge, some dried meat, a handful of berries, a flask of water. I slipped out of the village before dawn, moving like a phantom through the pre-morning twilight, using all my old trucking route tricks to find the best way out, the least patrolled trail. I headed east, towards where the main roads lay. I hiked for hours, my lungs burning, my legs aching, but a fragile spark of hope ignited in my chest. The forest was thick, unforgiving, but I pushed on, adrenaline coursing through me. Just as the sun began to climb high in the sky, dappling the forest floor with patches of light, I heard a rustle behind me, then another. I stopped, my breath held. The hairs on my arms stood on end. "Now, Mike," Silas's voice, raspy but laced with an unsettling undertone, drifted through the trees. "Where do you think you're off to?" I spun around. There they were, Silas, Caleb, and Jude. Not tired from logging, but looking fresh and alert, standing in a semicircle, blocking my path. Their faces were devoid of the easy smiles I had grown accustomed to. Their eyes, usually crinkled with age or good humor, were cold, hard, and utterly without warmth. In Jude's gaze, I saw a flicker of something truly predatory, a glint that made my blood run cold. "Just taking a walk," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, but my voice came out thin and reedy. Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "A long walk seems to me. We figured you'd try something foolish, but you ain't going anywhere, son. Not yet." They escorted me back to the village. The kindness was gone, replaced by a firm clinical efficiency. Their hands, when they touched my arm, were not gentle. Their eyes, when they met mine, held an unmistakable, chilling threat. The charade was over. It was then I learned about the hunters. They patrolled all the roads, all the trails, all the paths leading into and out of this hidden valley. Their presence, when I attempted to escape, was always too timely, too precise. It was not coincidence. It was design. They did not just patrol, they watched. They knew. About every step, every intention, every desperate thought. A cold, heavy cloak of paranoia settled over me, a constant, suffocating weight that never truly lifted. The realization settled deep into my bones, colder than any mountain winter. I was not just stuck. I was a prisoner. My truck would not be fixed. I would not be allowed to leave. This village was not just an isolated community. It was a carefully constructed, meticulously maintained trap. And the thought, clear and sharp as a surgeon's blade, sliced through my mind. They are not just living here. They are hiding. And I, their unwitting guest, had seen too much. I was no longer a lost traveler. I was collateral, a loose end, and a shiver, deeper and more profound than any fear of coyotes, coursed through me, a creeping certainty that my life as I knew it was over. Another year bled into the mountain seasons, a slow, agonizing crawl of days that blurred into an indistinguishable mass. The sun rose and set, the leaves turned from vibrant green to fiery gold, then fell to expose the skeletal trees, only to burst forth again in a flush of spring. And I, Mike, the man of the road, was still there, a specter haunting a life that was not his. I had, in the end, accepted my position. There was no other choice. Resistance was futile, escape impossible. So I buried my old life, my independence, my very identity, deep beneath the calluses on my hands and the vacant stare in my eyes. I worked. I chopped wood until my muscles screamed, then chopped more. I helped with the small farm plots, tilling the hard earth, planting seeds, harvesting meager crops. I learned to be a carpenter, joining planks, raising frames, repairing sagging roofs. I became a part of their daily routine, a silent cog in their archaic machine. But even as I swung an axe alongside Caleb or repaired a fence with Jude, I maintained an internal distance. I was a spy in plain sight, a silent observer in their strange, unsettling world. Always watching, always listening, trying to understand. The full moon, though, that was the constant, terrifying reminder. The howls from the forest became a regular occurrence, growing clearer, more distinct, and even more horrifying with each passing month. They were not just cries of wild animals. They were guttural, primal, laced with a raw intelligence that chilled me to the bone. I started searching for clues. After a full moon night, when the villagers were back to their placid, human routine, I slipped into the surrounding woods, driven by a morbid curiosity and a desperate need to understand. I found things. Patches of coarse, dark hair snagged on low branches, unlike anything I had ever seen on a bear or a wolf. Strange, unidentifiable tracks in the damp earth, too large for any normal animal, too distinct to be dismissed as deer. Deep, ragged gouges on ancient tree trunks, higher than any bear could reach. Something with immense strength had raked its claws in a fit of rage or pain. I tried to share my findings subtly with some of the younger, less intimidating villagers, but they offered only a vacant stare, a dismissive shrug, or worse, a tight, humorless smile from an elder who appeared from nowhere. Best not to trouble yourself with the forest's secrets, Mike. Silas had warned me once, his voice soft as a falling leaf, but his eyes holding the glint of sharpened steel. Some things are best left alone. I became a detective, forced into the role by my desperate need for truth. I started keeping a mental log. Who left the village before the full moon? Who returned, and in what state. Some of the younger men, particularly, became withdrawn, surly, in the days leading up to the lunar peak. Their eyes grew restless, darting, looking wilder and more intense. They disappeared into the woods, sometimes for a day, sometimes for two, returning haggard, mud-stained, but with a strange, manic energy in their gaze. And I started noticing small things. A favorite hunting knife gone missing before the moon, only to reappear, cleaned, a day later. A fresh, dark stain on a pair of Caleb's trousers, stubbornly clinging to the fabric despite repeated washing. The pieces fit, forming a picture far more monstrous than any coyote pack. The isolation, the constant fear, the forced conformity, it ate away at me, twisting me into something I no longer recognized. My old life, the roaring highways, the endless blacktop, the friendly faces of truck stop waitresses. It was a distant, faded dream, a story I had read in a book, not lived. I felt myself changing. The lines around my eyes deepened, not just from age, but from perpetual vigilance. My movements became quieter, more economical, feral. My senses, sharpened by the constant need to observe, to listen, to detect the slightest shift in the air, became honed to a painful degree. I heard rustles in the undergrowth that I once ignored, caught the faint scent of something musky and wild on the breeze, saw shadows shift in ways that were imperceptible to the untrained eye. I was losing my humanity, or at least the comfortable civil definition of humanity. Then came my first real clash with their unspoken rules. I accidentally, or subconsciously intentionally, overheard a hushed conversation one evening, a rapid exchange in their strange, guttural tongue, punctuated by Silas's sharp, commanding tones. It was heated, urgent. It referred to the outsider, to me. Driven by a sudden, reckless urge, I peeked into a small, windowless shed at the edge of the clearing, a place I had been implicitly warned to stay away from. Inside, in the gloom, I saw shackles. Heavy, rusty iron cuffs, clearly not for animals. And a strange, foul smell, like old blood and unwashed fur, hung heavy in the air. I was caught, not by a shout, but by a sudden, bone-chilling silence. Silas stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the last sliver of lamplight, his face unreadable. He did not say a word. He did not need to. For the next week, I was invisible. No one spoke to me. No one met my gaze. Meals were left for me on the porch. My presence was simply ignored. I had ceased to exist. In a small, tightly knit community such as theirs, where acceptance was a fragile shield against the terrifying unknown, this moral punishment was far worse than any physical beating. It was a complete stripping of my worth, a profound, psychological isolation that hammered home my utter powerlessness. It taught me the boundaries, not with words, but with soul-crushing silence. The fear, already a constant companion, deepened and twisted into something else, something colder and more insidious. Animals disappeared. A pig from a pen, a calf from the pasture, leaving behind only strange, deep claw marks in the earth. The livestock that remained often bore strange, ragged wounds. Something had tried to tear them apart but had been interrupted. And there were the accidents. A young man falling from a tree, his neck broken at an unnatural angle. An old woman wandering into the woods, never to be seen again, dismissed with a solemn shake of the head as lost to the forest. These events were never discussed openly, never lingered on. But I noticed them. I pieced them together, and they reinforced the chilling certainty that I was trapped among something unspeakable, something that wore human skin but operated by a different, darker set of rules. My faith in humanity, in the inherent goodness of people, began to crumble. These were not just strange, isolated folk. These were people who smiled, who offered food and shelter, who spoke in kind tones, yet held me captive, subtly threatened me, and orchestrated these grim accidents. They were not simply living in the woods. They thrived in a predatory ecosystem, and I was another part of it. The realization that I was among beings who appeared human, but were fundamentally, terrifyingly other, slowly but surely brought me to the brink of despair. I started to question my own transformation, a descent into something less human, merely by breathing their air and living their monstrous lie. After more than a year in that raw, unforgiving wilderness, my senses had sharpened to an unbearable degree. The constant state of vigilance, the need to anticipate, to observe, had honed my perception. I now distinguished the whisper of a deer moving through the undergrowth from the heavier tread of a human or something else. The subtle changes in the air pressure before a storm, the faint metallic scent that preceded a kill, the precise call of a specific bird that signaled a shift in the forest's mood. These were no longer abstract concepts, but urgent, visceral messages. I learned to read the woods like a local. Every rustle, every snapped twig, every distant call was a signal, a warning, or a clue. The behaviors of some villagers before the full moon became less of a mystery and more of a predictable, terrifying ritual. They grew quieter, their gazes more distant, fixed on something I could not see. An undercurrent of irritability, a low hum of tension permeated the village. Eye contact became rare, and when it happened, their eyes held a flicker of something wild, something untamed, barely suppressed. There were those, too, who simply vanished into the deepest parts of the forest a day or two before the moon reached its peak, only to reappear days later. They were haggard, yes, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with dirt and dried blood, usually from a successful hunt, they claimed. But their eyes, always their eyes, burned with a strange, fierce brilliance, a profound satisfaction that sent shivers down my spine. I tried, in my subtle way, to draw out information from the more peripheral members of the community, the younger ones, the older women who were less guarded. They spoke of ancient things, of legends and superstitions about beasts of the forest that protected their valley from outsiders, that kept the balance. They were vague tales, passed down through generations, stories meant to scare children and explain the unexplainable. The old spirits, an old woman once mumbled, her fingers trembling as she spun wool. They watch over us, keep the bad things out. I was meant to dismiss them as folklore, a quaint aspect of their isolated culture. But I perceived the insidious truth hidden within them, a kernel of malevolent reality wrapped in the comforting guise of myth. One night, tormented by the usual pre-full moon insomnia, I lay in my bed, listening to the heightened sounds of the forest. The wind sighed through the pines, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else, something musky and primal. I got up, compelled, and pressed my face against the cool glass of my window, staring out into the moon-dappled darkness. The moonlight, sharp and silvery, sliced through the canopy, painting the forest floor in stark blacks and whites. Then I saw them, silhouettes, moving through the trees. Not one, but several. They were too large, too low to the ground to be regular men. Their movements were fluid, predatory, unlike any human gait. A rustle, a heavy thud, and then a faint, sickening crunch, like bones being ground to powder. A guttural, animalistic growl, deep and resonant, echoed from the shadows. My breath hitched in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, desperate to rationalize. It was the play of shadows, I told myself. It was my fear, my exhaustion, twisting familiar sounds into something monstrous. Just a trick of the light, just the wind. But even as I tried to convince myself, a cold premonition, a chilling certainty of what I saw, settled deep within me. It was a hint, a mere whisper of the terror that waited, just beyond the edge of my sight, ready to consume me whole. The futility of my situation was a constant torment. Driven by a desperate, pathological need for a connection to the world I had lost, I found a few more discarded radio parts in an old lean-to shed. With my trucker's knack for tinkering and an innate understanding of mechanics, I spent days, weeks, holed up in my room trying to piece together a rudimentary receiver. I dreamt of static, then a voice, a snatch of news, a familiar song. Anything. I imagined the crackle of a signal, the distant murmur of human civilization, a lifeline thrown across the void. I worked in secret, hidden away, my heart pounding with a fragile hope. I had it. The coil wound, the condenser connected. I just needed to fashion an antenna. I went to bed, a tiny spark of triumph flickering in my chest. The next morning I returned to my project. The coil was gone. Vanished. The delicate wiring I had painstakingly soldered was snipped clean. It was meticulous, surgical. Not the random destruction of a child, but the deliberate, knowing act of an adult. They knew. They watched. They controlled. My every move, every desperate attempt to escape, every secret hope, it was all observed, measured, and systematically dismantled. The sense of pervasive surveillance, of being a fly caught in a spider's web, became suffocating. I started to question my own sanity. How did people survive in such conditions? I was an animal in a cage, trained to perform, fed, but utterly without freedom. My humanity was a thin membrane, stretched taut over a core of primal fear and survival instinct, threatening to tear at any moment. What kind of person did I become? Trapped here, surrounded by these beings. What limits would I cross to survive? The thought was a bitter metallic taste in my mouth, filling me with profound self-disgust. The man I had been, Mike the independent trucker, was slowly, inexorably dying. The air in the village grew thick with a palpable tension. Another full moon was approaching, heralded by the usual disquiet among the villagers. The whispers were more frequent, the glances more guarded. It was the oppressive stillness before a violent summer thunderstorm, where the air hummed with unseen electricity. This time I resolved I would not cower in my room, listening to the distant howls and trying to rationalize the sounds. This time I would see. This time I would know. The truth, however horrific, was better than this agonizing, suffocating uncertainty. The line had been drawn, and I was going to cross it. The night of the full moon was a cold, clear canvas, the sky a velvet black studded with 1,000,000 indifferent stars. The moon itself hung like a giant polished bone in the heavens, shedding an eerie, silvery light that painted the forest in stark, unsettling contrasts. Tonight there would be no more guessing, no more dismissing the sounds as coyotes or tricks of the light. tonight I would know. My decision to break the ultimate taboo was born of a desperate cocktail of fear, a perverse curiosity, and the crushing weight of 20 years of captivity. I prepared meticulously, drawing on every scrap of knowledge I had gleaned as a trucker and more recently as a prisoner. I smeared mud and ash on my face and hands, darkening my skin to blend with the shadows. I dressed in muted, worn clothes, shed my boots, and wrapped my feet in layers of cloth, making my steps silent as a falling leaf. I knew the forest now, the scent of damp moss that marked a deer trail, the rustle of leaves that betrayed a hidden route, the low, gurgling sound of a hidden stream. I was no longer a lost city boy. I was a phantom moving through their world. I followed the familiar figures, Caleb, Jude, and a few others, as they slipped away from the village, their forms disappearing into the deepest shadows of the forest. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the night. I found a dense thicket of blackberry bushes and ancient rhododendrons near their gathering spot, a perfect thorny hideaway that offered concealment and a clear, albeit obstructed, view of a small, moon-drenched clearing. The waiting was excruciating. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, every soft sigh of the wind through the pines sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my veins. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and something else, a coppery, musky odor that was subtly, horrifyingly familiar. My own breath hitched in my throat, each beat of my heart echoing in my ears, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Then it began. One of the men, a younger fellow named Thomas, dropped to his knees, his hands clutching at his head. A low groan rumbled from his throat, a sound of agony and something else, something I could not place. His clothes, already strained, began to tear. First the shirt, the fabric ripping with a violent shred, exposing a sudden, grotesque ripple of muscle beneath his skin. His spine arched, his limbs elongating, cracking, popping with sickening wet sounds that made me clench my jaw, fighting the urge to vomit. His face, contorted in a silent scream, began to stretch, his jaw extending, his teeth sharpening into wicked points. A dark, coarse fur erupted from his skin, crawling over him like a living disease, thickening and darkening. His nails, thick and yellow, elongated into claws. His eyes, fixed on the moon, glowed with an unholy, feral yellow. And he was not alone. Caleb and Jude, along with 3 other men, underwent the same hellish transformation. Their bodies swelled, their bones snapping and reforming with wet, sickening cracks that were impossible to comprehend. Their human forms, familiar and mundane, shredded away like old photographs, revealing the raw, beastly horror beneath. They grew taller, massive, their shoulders broadening, their necks thickening. Their faces became snouts, their ears pointed and fur-lined. Guttural primal growls, sounds ripped from the very bowels of the earth, tore from their throats. Within minutes, where 5 men had stood, now stood 5 monstrous, bipedal wolves, glistening with sweat and raw animal power under the moon. They were covered in shaggy, dark fur, their claws glinting, their yellow eyes burning with unholy fire. The transformation complete, they did not hesitate. With a unified, terrifying snarl, they lunged forward, disappearing into the deeper woods. Then came the hunt. I heard it, a symphony of pure, primal horror, the thudding of heavy paws, the tearing of brush, the guttural roars of the transformed beasts, punctuated by the horrific screams of their prey. The sounds of their victims, deer, bears, wild hogs, were so utterly desperate, so full of pure, agonizing terror, that they echoed with a sickening resemblance to human cries. The forest became a bloody altar, and the night a canvas for unspeakable butchery. My blood ran cold, my body rigid with shock, my mind reeling. I lay there, numb with terror, listening to the sounds of the hunt fade into the distance. Time ceased to exist. I was shaking uncontrollably, every nerve ending screaming. My breath was shallow, ragged, tasting of bile and fear. I knew. I had seen. And the truth was far, far worse than any nightmare. As I tried to slowly, carefully push myself back, a loose branch snapped under my hand with a sound like a pistol shot in the sudden silence of the post-hunt forest. A heavy shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom. Silas, not transformed, but standing there, his human form still imposing, but his eyes glinting in the moonlight, held a knowledge that made my stomach clench. He had been watching, waiting. His face, usually kindly, was now a mask of grim determination. Then, from behind him, stepped the other, the oldest, largest of the transformed. His fur was matted, his fangs still dripping with something dark, his yellow eyes burning with primal ferocity fixed on me. And then, a flicker, a glimmer of recognition. In those monstrous predator's eyes I saw something that acknowledged me, something that spoke of memory and a shared, albeit twisted, history. The old man who had offered me stew, the one who had so kindly promised to fix my truck, now stood before me, a monstrous wolf, his fangs bared, his body radiating raw, terrifying power. They brought me back. Not with the soft, insistent touches of before, but with cold, beastly force. Caleb and Jude, now back in human form, their eyes still holding the echoes of their monstrous hunt, gripped my arms with hands like iron vices. They dragged me back to the village, no longer feigning kindness, their faces grim, utterly devoid of warmth. I was brought before the leaders of the community, Silas among them, all now in human guise, their faces impassive. They sat around the central bonfire, its flames casting long dancing shadows that shifted and distorted their features. Silas looked at me, his gaze penetrating, assessing. "You saw?" he said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual raspy warmth. It was not a question. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. "Then you know our truth," he continued, "our ancient truth. And that truth carries a price, Mike." He paused, letting the words hang in the still night air, thick with the smell of wood smoke and the lingering metallic scent of the forest's recent violence. "You have a choice," Silas finally said, his voice surprisingly calm. "We can make sure you never speak of what you saw. It would be quick. Or you will live among us, knowing what you know. But your life will be ours, under our full control. You will be a part of us, a servant of the pack. You will never leave. You will never speak, and you will never betray us. You will understand our nature, our hunger, our needs. Without pretense, without comfort, you will be one of us, but not of us." The words were stark, brutal, stripped of any kind of sugarcoating. Death, or a living death. There was no real choice. The image of the monstrous wolf, the glint in its eyes, the memory of the sickening crunch of bones, it was branded onto my soul. I looked at the impassive faces around the fire, faces that now held only a cold, predatory resolve. There was no escape, no hope of rescue. Only this. I nodded again. A slow, desolate movement. My voice was a raw whisper. I understand. It was not acceptance. It was capitulation. I felt a profound internal loss, a severing of every last tie to the human world, to the man I once was. The independent trucker, Mike, died that night in the forest, replaced by something hollow, something broken. I was no longer just a prisoner. I was a servant, a tool, a resource, a domesticated animal caught in the terrifying machinery of their monstrous survival. My old life, my old self was gone, swallowed whole by the darkness of the woods and the cold, yellow eyes of the creatures I now called my masters. My life, as I had known it, was a memory etched in frost. The world that had appeared so normal, so safe, was gone. Now I was a manservant, a chillingly descriptive title for my new reality. The pretense of getting my truck fixed was dropped entirely. My tasks were no longer mere chores to pass the time, but explicit duties demanded by the pack leaders, designed to integrate me into their monstrous ecosystem. My days were a grueling cycle of physical labor, providing for the community. I helped with the hunting, for deer, for bear, for wild turkey. Never for humans, not directly. But the knowledge that some of the pack's hunting expeditions were for a different kind of prey, a more sentient kind, gnawed at me, a constant sickening undertone to every kill. I repaired buildings, cleared land, maintained their crude tools, keeping the village ticking over, a human cog in a mechanism of pure, predatory survival. I was also tasked with maintaining the illusion of normalcy for the few remaining villagers who had not yet been initiated into the pack's true nature, or were too young to understand. Their ignorance was a fragile shield, and I, the knowing captive, was now complicit in its upkeep. I was immersed in the brutal mechanics of their self-sufficiency. There was no outside trade, no reliance on the modern world. Their supplies were sourced entirely from the vast, unforgiving wilderness surrounding us. I saw the hidden caches of dried meat and salted fish, the meticulously organized stores of wild herbs and medicines, the secret, camouflaged clearings where they grew hardy grains and vegetables. They were masters of the land, understanding its cycles, its resources, its cruel abundance, with an innate efficiency that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Their daily life was not just old-fashioned. It was a testament to generations of forced self-reliance, a horrifyingly effective system honed by their need to survive in plain sight, yet utterly hidden. The deeper I went into their ways, the more real, and thus the more horrifying, their existence became. I learned their code, not through explicit teaching, but through relentless observation and the chilling clarity of their actions. Their primary directive was simple: concealment. Above all else, they must remain hidden from the human world. They did not kill humans unnecessarily, not out of mercy, but out of a calculated self-preservation. Unnecessary was a fluid term, though. An outsider stumbling too close, a hunter straying too deep, a curious child asking too many questions. These quickly escalated to extreme necessity. This constant tightrope walk, the understanding that their morality was purely utilitarian, added a chilling, thrilling element to my existence. Every interaction with an outsider, every casual conversation about a passing car, was imbued with a terrifying tension. I walked on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong step from anyone would mean their end, and mine. I watched them, these dual beings. In their beast form, they were creatures of immense power, driven by raw instinct, savage and relentless. Yet, even in the throes of their transformation, there was a terrible, focused intelligence in their eyes, a strategic cunning that belied complete animalism. They were thinking predators. But it was in their human form that the true horror often lay. Stripped of the fur and fangs, they still carried the predator within. Their eyes held a calculating coldness, a watchful secrecy. Their movements, even in human guise, were economical, fluid, territorial. There was a casual cruelty in their humor, a detached assessment in their gaze, a way they silently gauged a person's weakness that marked them as something other, something infinitely more dangerous than mere humans. They were wolves in sheep's clothing, even when wearing their own clothes. Escape, I understood, was not merely difficult. It was utterly impossible. It was not just that they kept a close watch on the village itself. Their control extended far beyond the immediate clearing. The entire region, for hundreds of miles around, was their territory. Every trail, every hidden creek, every barely visible deer path, every winding mountain road, it was all known to them, patrolled, monitored. The hunters were not just a few men. They were dozens, an invisible network of eyes and ears. I was trapped within an immense, invisible cage, its walls made of watchful eyes and silent patrols. The pervasive, boundless control of the pack seeped into every pore of my being, an oppressive certainty that there was simply no way out. The psychological pressure was relentless. Threats were rarely spoken aloud. Not anymore. They did not need to be. They were in the subtle shifts of their eyes, the knowing glint when Silas looked at me, the imperceptible smirk on Jude's face when I failed a task. I was constantly reminded of my vulnerability, my utter insignificance in the face of their power. My life, my very existence, meant nothing to them beyond its utility. I was a tool, a possession, utterly alone among them, a solitary human amidst a pack of monsters. The feeling was a crushing weight, stripping away my spirit inch by agonizing inch. And yet, in a perverse, horrifying way, I adapted. The constant exposure to their brutal, efficient way of life, the ceaseless demand for my labor, the ever-present threat of their true nature, it forged me. My body grew harder, my muscles leaner, more resilient. I learned to move through the forest with a silence and grace I never thought possible. My survival skills, once a trucker's practical knowledge, became raw instinct. I read the signs of the forest now, understood the patterns of the wind, predicted the approach of a storm with uncanny accuracy. I even anticipated their moods, their subtle shifts in demeanor, understanding when to speak and when to remain silent, when to be useful and when to be invisible. I was becoming an extension of their world, a part of the living mechanism, even if that mechanism was fueled by a monstrous secret. I was no longer Mike. I was something else entirely, a creature shaped by terror and the unrelenting need to survive. As the seasons turned again, and the years added their invisible layers to my forced existence, a strange and unsettling shift occurred within me. I saw them not just as monsters, but as something more complex, more disturbing. They were not mindless beasts. They were creatures with a social structure, a brutal hierarchy enforced through deference and displays of power, but a structure nonetheless. I observed their internal conflicts, the subtle power plays among the younger males, the quiet authority wielded by the older females. There was even a form of their own morality, harsh and utilitarian, but present. They protected their children fiercely, tended to their elderly with a grim loyalty, and showed a fierce, unwavering allegiance to the pack, even if that allegiance meant unspeakable acts against anything outside it. It was a terrifying, profound realization. They were not merely predators, but a complex, self-regulating society of predators. I witnessed the constant internal struggle of their duality. Some, especially the older ones, carried the weight of their wolf part with a visible weariness. I saw them in the days leading up to the full moon, their faces etched with a profound sadness, a quiet resignation. They retreated, attempting to suppress the rising instincts, their eyes full of a sorrow that, for a fleeting moment, felt human. Others, though, especially the younger, more ambitious ones, embraced their transformations with a primal glee. Their eyes sparkled with anticipation. Their movements became restless, arrogant. They reveled in the immense power, the raw, untamed strength that came with their monstrous form, finding a terrifying liberation in shedding their human skin. This internal conflict, this eternal tug-of-war between man and beast, was a constant raw nerve within the pack, creating a tense emotional undercurrent that was palpable. My status in the village, too, underwent a subtle, unsettling evolution. I was no longer the desperate outsider, the bewildered captive. I had become something else, something useful, something accepted. They treated me not as a peer, never as an equal, but as a valuable, albeit voiceless, member of the pack. Like a domesticated animal, a well-trained hound or a sturdy ox. My life was spared, my physical needs met, because I was a resource. I could mend things, understand old technology, perform tasks that their simpler, more instinct-driven lives had long forgotten. I became the indispensable link to a world they had abandoned, yet sometimes needed to remember. I was a valuable prisoner, yes, a lucky charm, an amulet against complete technological regression. This realization was a double-edged sword. It meant my life was precious, but also that my captivity was absolute. Sometimes, strange gifts appeared for me. A piece of cured venison, a surprisingly well-crafted wooden bowl, a faded, well-worn, leather-bound book from a forgotten library. They were not acts of kindness. They were the practical offerings of a shepherd to a valuable sheep, a farmer to a productive ox. They were tokens meant to maintain my health, my usefulness, my quiet compliance. I accepted them with a bitter taste in my mouth, understanding that they were not gestures of affection, but simply a crude form of inventory management. The thoughts of escape, once a burning ember, had dwindled to faint, forgotten ashes. The truth was, even if I slipped past their pervasive network of patrols, even if I found my way out of this vast green cage, where would I go? How could I return to a world I had left 20 years ago, a world that had undoubtedly moved on, forgotten me, changed beyond recognition? I was a relic, a phantom, a man who had seen too much, been changed too fundamentally. I was alien to both worlds now, neither fully human nor truly part of the pack. I was a creature suspended between two realities, belonging to neither, doomed to forever wander the lonely periphery. The golden cage, I finally understood, was not just around me. It was within me. It was in the long, desolate stretch of those 2 decades that I found an unexpected, fragile connection. Her name was Lena. She was younger than me, in her late 20s, with eyes that held a depth of sadness and a quiet yearning I instantly recognized. Her spirit was different, softer, more introspective than most in the community. She moved with a hesitant grace, her gaze often fixed on the distant horizons, searching for something she could not name. Lena feared her beast nature. I saw it in the way she recoiled from the full moon rituals, the way her hands trembled on the nights before the change. She was an outcast among her own kind, burdened by a curse she had not chosen. In me, she saw not a broken man, not a prisoner, but a kindred spirit, another outsider, another soul caught in a fate they did not desire. Our connection grew slowly, carefully, nurtured in stolen moments and hushed whispers. We met by the winding creek that flowed through the valley, its rushing water a natural screen for our voices. Our bond was forged in the crucible of shared otherness. I, a human trapped among monsters, she, a monster longing for humanity. We spoke of fears, of dreams, of the world outside, a world she had only heard legends of, a world I barely remembered. Her questions were naive, yet poignant, sparking faint, flickering embers of memories in my own fading mind. In those moments, by the babbling water, sharing the bitter taste of our isolation, I felt a fragile connection to another living soul, a lifeline in a sea of despair. Lena's confessions, whispered under the cover of the rustling leaves, opened a new, terrifying vista onto the pack's internal world. "We're tired, Mike," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "The young ones. We don't want to hide anymore. We want to live, truly live, not like shadows in the forest." She spoke of the growing frustration, the yearning for a different life, a life where they were not constantly fleeing and concealing. She unveiled the profound internal fissures, the mounting tension within the pack that I had sensed for years, but never fully understood. Lena's words, her shared hopes and fears, rekindled a dying ember within me. A spark of hope for escape, long dormant, flared to life. She was the key, the unexpected accomplice who would finally lead me out of this golden cage. The thought was intoxicating, terrifying, and utterly reckless. I began to plan, cautiously, meticulously, understanding that this was my last desperate gamble. Our clandestine meetings, once a source of solace, became fraught with escalating risk. There were eyes everywhere, always watching. Some of the more observant pack members, particularly the stern, older women, noticed our growing closeness, their gazes hardening with disapproval. A quiet word here, a pointed look there. The subtle signs of impending discovery were unmistakable. The air crackled with a low-level suspense, each rustle in the undergrowth, each passing shadow, a potential informant. We moved with heightened caution, every whisper measured, every glance guarded. One wrong step, one careless word, and all hope is lost, replaced by an unbearable reckoning. Lena proved to be a formidable ally. She had an intimate knowledge of the surrounding wilderness, understanding the rarely used trails, the less patrolled routes, the hidden caves and sheltered nooks that provided cover. Together, we pieced together a detailed plan, a route painstakingly memorized, a time carefully chosen to coincide with the pack's most vulnerable moments, a list of meager supplies to be gathered in secret. These concrete details, this tangible hope, reignited a forgotten fire within me, giving me a renewed sense of purpose, a reason to fight, a reason to live beyond mere survival. The clock was ticking, and the game had entered its final, most dangerous phase. The internal tension, a simmering undercurrent for so long, finally reached a boiling point. The village air, usually thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, now crackled with unspoken animosity, a palpable unease that made even the children whisper and cling closer to their mothers. Discussions, once held in hushed tones, erupted into open, aggressive arguments around the evening fire. The traditionalists, their faces grim and set, pounded their fists against the rough-hewn table, their voices raspy with age and fury. Silas, his eyes cold and unyielding, repeated his ancient warnings, threatening the younger, restless ones with dire consequences should they stray from the established ways. It was Jude, now grown into a towering man with a harsh glint in his eyes, who laid bare the reformers' daring, monstrous plan. He stood before the gathered pack, his voice ringing with a chilling conviction. "We must expand," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "Our blood runs thin. We hide like frightened animals while the world outside grows fat and ripe for the taking." His proposal was audacious, horrifying in its scope. An organized, full-scale assault on a nearby small town, not just for sustenance, but to replenish the blood, to forcibly turn new humans, to swell their ranks with fresh, unwitting converts, and to take servants like me, but many more, to control and exploit for their own nefarious purposes. The words hung in the air, a cold, sickening promise of widespread terror. Lena, standing beside me, gripped my arm, her face ashen, her eyes wide with fear. The scale of the catastrophe, the pure, unadulterated horror of it, was too much to bear. The traditionalists, led by Silas, were vehemently opposed. Their ancient wisdom, honed by centuries of clandestine existence, screamed defiance. Madness. Silas roared, his voice cracking with outrage. Such an act would expose us. The humans, they will hunt us down like vermin. This is the end of our kind if you do this. They understood the delicate balance, the precarious tightrope they walked between their hidden world and the human one. An attack of that magnitude shattered the illusion of normalcy, unleashing a retaliatory force that left no stone unturned until every last one of them was found and destroyed. The confrontation became a desperate, heated exchange, a clash of ideologies that verged on outright physical violence, teeth bared, guttural growls barely suppressed. I found myself, the human keeper, caught squarely between these two raging fires. Both factions looked to me, not for my opinion, but as a living, breathing argument for their respective positions. See his usefulness? Jude spat, gesturing at me with a contemptuous flick of his hand. Imagine a dozen such servants, brought in from the outside, willing or not. Silas, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as it fell upon me, countered. He is a symbol of what we lose if we are reckless. A human, yes, but a human we control, not one we have to fight a war for. My very existence became a pawn in their monstrous game, my life hanging precariously on the outcome of their volatile debate. The news of the imminent town attack, its sheer, brutal reality, galvanized Lena and me. Our escape plan, once a carefully considered long-term project, had to be accelerated, now a frantic race against time. This was our window. The pack, divided and distracted by its own internal conflict and the impending hunt, was at its most vulnerable. This was our chance, the only chance we would ever get. Under the cloak of deepening night, our last preparations were made with a desperate urgency. Lena and I moved like shadows, gathering the meager supplies we had painstakingly collected over weeks. Dried meat, a water skin, a crude knife, a small pouch of flint and steel. Every creak of the floorboards, Every gust of wind through the open window, every distant hoot of an owl, sent jolts of adrenaline through my system. Each glance exchanged between us was laden with the weight of our shared secret, our desperate hope, and the terrifying certainty that failure meant not just death, but a fate far worse. There was no room for error. This was life or absolute oblivion. The decision was made. The pack split, its unity shattered by ambition and fear. One faction, led by Jude and the younger, more aggressive members, prepared for the great hunt, the assault on the human town. Their eyes glowed with a feral anticipation, their bodies tense with a barely suppressed energy. The other faction, the traditionalists, led by Silas and the elders, remained in the village, committing to a traditional hunt for game in the opposite direction, a desperate attempt to maintain their old ways and distance themselves from the catastrophic plan of the young. The schism was complete, the pack torn asunder. As the two groups melted into the moonless night, their departure left behind a vacuum of chaos and distraction. This was it, our moment. The clock struck. And Lena and I, a human and a reluctant monster, began our desperate dash for an illusion of freedom. The forest was a maze of deep, impenetrable shadows, lit only by the faint, diffused glow of the receding moon, now a sliver of bone in the pre-dawn sky. Chaos swirled in the village behind us, a cacophony of preparations for the two separate hunts. The young wolves heading towards the town, the old ones scattering for the traditional chase. It was our narrow window, a sliver of opportunity forged in the furnace of their internal conflict. Lena and I moved like wraiths, our movements cautious, each footfall measured, every rustle of the undergrowth sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Every shadow shifted, coalesced, and took on the terrifying shape of a lurking werewolf. Every distant sound was a telltale sign of pursuit. We pushed ourselves to the absolute limit, our lungs burning, our muscles screaming in protest. Lena, with her innate knowledge of the forest, led the way, guiding us along hidden trails, barely perceptible deer paths that snaked through the densest thickets. We avoided the well-worn routes, the places we knew the patrols swept, relying instead on instinct and her intimate understanding of the pack's movements. The air was heavy with the damp scent of pine needles and decaying leaves, but also with the metallic tang of adrenaline, the acrid taste of fear in my mouth. It was a race against time, a desperate scramble for survival, our hearts hammering against our ribs like trapped birds. Distant cries, faint howls, drifted on the wind. It was them. They were behind us, a primal orchestra of pursuit, their senses honed, their patience endless. The sound spurred us on, infusing our tired limbs with a desperate, renewed energy. We were so close. I could feel it. The promise of the road, the faint, forgotten scent of asphalt, of humanity. Salvation. It was impossibly close. A mirage shimmering just beyond the reach of our grasping fingers. Then finally we burst out of the suffocating embrace of the trees. Before us lay not a dirt track, not a winding country lane, but an honest-to-God paved road. Overgrown at the edges, cracked and fissured in places, but undeniably asphalt. A ribbon of black, stretching out into the pre-dawn gloom. The relief that washed over me was absolute, overwhelming, a sudden dizzying wave that brought me to my knees. We had made it. We were free. But the relief was fleeting, a brittle thing that shattered in the next heartbeat. The road, as expected, was utterly deserted. The air, thick with the scent of pine, was still. Then from far down the road a faint, imperceptible hum reached my ears. The sound grew slowly at first, then more rapidly. The distinct rumble of engines, the whisper of tires on pavement. Machines. From the outside world. Rescue. My heart leaped with a frantic, desperate hope. The approaching sound grew louder, clearer. Headlights, twin beams cutting through the gloom, appeared around a distant bend. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The end of the nightmare. The beginning of something new. But as the vehicles drew closer, a sickening dread curdled in my stomach, cold and heavy. They were not the sleek, modern cars I vaguely remembered from my old life. These were old, modified, familiar. They were the same beat-up, rusty Ford pickup trucks I had seen in the village. The same models, the same crude modifications, the same faded paint jobs. And behind the wheels, their faces illuminated by the headlights, were the hunters. Caleb, Jude, and Silas. Not in their beast forms, but in their human guises, their faces impassive, their eyes holding that chilling, knowing glint. The horrifying realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs, turning my blood to ice. These were not saviors. These were not a connection to the outside world. These were their cars. The same vehicles I had seen parked silently in the village, the ones they used to patrol the perimeter. I stared, my mind reeling, my world shattering into a million pieces. They did not just hide in the forest. They controlled everything. For decades they had maintained this illusion. The roads, the approaches, the very boundaries of the outside world. It was all part of their trap. Their territory was not just the valley. It extended for miles and miles. An invisible, insidious web of control that stretched far beyond the village limits. The very escape I had yearned for, the freedom I had risked everything for, was an illusion. A meticulously crafted stage, and Lena and I were merely actors in their final cruel act. Lena beside me looked up. Her eyes met mine, and in their depths I saw not despair, but a profound, ancient pain, a chilling sense of rightness. Her face was etched with a grim resignation. She had known this truth all along. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, but it echoed like a thunderclap in the sudden, crushing silence of the dawn. "You're one of us anyway, Mike," she said. Her words devoid of malice, of triumph, only a quiet, horrifying certainty. "You survived 20 years living among us. 20 years breathing our air, seeing our truth, accepting our ways. A part of you already belongs to the pack." Her words were not a threat. They were a statement of fact, a cold, undeniable truth that twisted a knife in my gut and froze the very blood in my veins. The trap was not just physical. It was in my bones, in my blood, in the very essence of my being. I was theirs. I had always been theirs. And there was no escape. I stood on the cracked asphalt, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the approaching headlights, the humid Appalachian air heavy in my lungs. The world had just imploded, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating finality of Lena's words. "You're one of us anyway." The revelation was a gut punch, leaving me breathless and hollow. 20 years, 2 decades of survival, of observation, of becoming a part of their dark ecosystem. I had not just been a prisoner. I had been an unwitting incubator, slowly acclimating, being prepared for this very moment. I was not just caught in their trap. I had become a part of its very fabric. The trucks pulled to a silent halt 100 yards down the road, their engines purring menacingly. Behind me, from the deep shadows of the forest, they emerged. Not in a frantic chase, not with snarling aggression, but silently, like apparitions. They simply stopped, forming a semicircle at the edge of the tree line, their forms indistinct in the dim light. Some were the hulking, fur-covered shapes of the transformed. Others, like Caleb and Jude and Silas, were in human guise, their faces unreadable, their eyes fixed on me with an unsettling stillness. They surrounded me, not with hostility, but with a quiet, terrifying expectation, waiting for me to complete a ritual they already knew by heart. I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping from the silent forest and the expectant pack to the paved road and the idling trucks. The machines, once symbols of escape of the outside world, were as alien and meaningless as the ancient trees. They were just another extension of their world, a seamless part of the carefully constructed illusion. There was no way back to the comfortable ignorance of humanity. The man I had been, the man of the road, was an anachronism, a phantom, a pariah in a world that would never understand what he had seen. And there was no way back to the village as their captive. That chapter was closed. I was caught, suspended between two worlds, irrevocably alienated from both. My breath hitched, a strange, guttural sound clawing its way up my throat. It was not a sob. It was not a gasp of fear. It was something deeper, something primal. A long, mournful, guttural howl ripped from my chest, echoing off the silent trees and the waiting trucks. It was not a physical transformation, not a sudden eruption of fur and fangs. It was something far more profound, a psychological, spiritual metamorphosis. This howl was not an expression of terror, but a recognition, an acceptance, a declaration of belonging. It was the sound of an instinct, long buried, finally breaking free, a primal acknowledgement of the wildness that had taken root within me. The pack remained silent, but in their eyes, as the first pale light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, I saw a subtle shift. The aggression was gone, replaced by a strange understanding, a respectful acknowledgement. They had been waiting for this. They had known. In that moment, I became one of them, not physically, not in flesh and blood, but in soul. I accepted their world, their brutal rules, their monstrous essence. I had seen their secret, lived among them, survived their horrors, and now I was a part of it. I was a part of their mystery, a living bridge between the human world and their hidden one, destined to walk the threshold between both. My last thoughts were of the man I had once been. Mike, the trucker, the independent soul who broke down on a lonely road 20 years ago. He was gone. He died that night, or slowly, agonizingly, over the 2 decades that followed. In his place stood someone else, someone forged in fear and isolation, someone who belonged to this world of shadows and sharpened instincts, forever changed. I took a slow, deliberate step back, turning away from the false promise of the road towards the silent, expectant figures at the forest's edge. It was not the step of a prisoner returning to his cage, but of someone who had made an irreversible choice. I would never return to the world of men, not truly, for I had become what I once feared, and in doing so had found my only path. My heart, the heart of Mike, the trucker, now howled with the voice of the wilderness, a testament to a terror, both immediate and timeless, beyond the feeble reach of human comprehension.